So for our next topic, we're going to be talking about Smith & Wesson's big 2A win. Today, quoting from Smith & Wesson's ex-host, today's unanimous Supreme Court decision shutting down this ridiculous lawsuit against our company represents not only a big win for Smith & Wesson, but our industry, American sovereignty, and most importantly, every American who wishes to exercise his or her Second Amendment rights. So, for those of you who are not familiar, there has been a lawsuit by the state of Mexico, somehow, against Smith & Wesson over their sales of firearms. So, what's laughable about this whole thing is it really never should have gotten off the ground. It should have started with the lower courts saying, no, get out of here. There is PLACA, the Peaceable Lawful Commerce in Arms Act or whatever. Basically, it's supposed to protect firearms manufacturers from these exact kind of frivolous lawsuits, and the fact that it did not get stopped at the lower courts, I think is an indictment of those lower courts and their obvious Second Amendment biases. Fortunately, the Supreme Court has said unequivocally, no, we are not going to allow this to continue any further, and we're not going to rule on the side of Mexico. Let's take a quick look at a few things that I had highlighted here in their judgment. So, because Mexico's complaint does not plausibly allege that the defendant gun manufacturers aided and abetted gun dealers' unlawful sale of firearms to Mexican traffickers, PLACA bars the lawsuit. That's exactly the way it should be. Unfortunately, it wasn't just Mexico and the other plaintiffs alleging that Smith & Wesson was knowingly giving firearms to or indirectly knowing that they were indirectly selling firearms to the cartels. You see how weird this logic is? I can barely even follow it myself. But not only do they say that PLACA bars it, but they also get into some of the other things here. Against the backdrop of that law, Mexico's complaint does not plausibly allege that the defendant manufacturers aided and abetted gun dealers' unlawful sale of firearms to Mexican traffickers. To begin, the complaint sets for itself a high bar. It does not pinpoint, as most aiding and abetting claims do, any specific criminal transactions that the defendants allegedly assisted. I wonder if there are any criminal transactions that actually were assisted. Fast and Furious, anyone? I wonder why they aren't trying to sue the ATF over Fast and Furious. Probably because this is a politically motivated lawsuit. However, to get back to the actual statement from SCOTUS, instead, it levels a more general accusation that all the manufacturers assist some number of unidentified rogue dealers in violation of various illegal bars. The systemic nature of that charge cannot help but heighten Mexico's burden. To survive, it must be backed by plausible allegations of pervasive, systemic, and culpable assistance. It's far from clear that such behavior without more could ever account as aiding and abetting under the court's precedent. And in any event, Mexico has not said enough to make its allegations on this point plausible. It does not confront that the manufacturers do not directly supply any dealers, and its complaint does not name alleged bad apple dealers or provide any grounds for thinking that anyone up the supply chain often acquires that information. What Mexico has plausibly alleged is only that manufacturers know some identified dealers routinely violate the law, but this describes indifference rather than assistance, similar to the insufficient allegations in Twitter. Now, the Supreme Court's opinion continues on further and does talk about the Twitter case. Specifically, the Twitter case was a lawsuit alleging that Twitter was culpable for ISIS attacks because ISIS uses Twitter. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's not a thing. And while I'm not generally on the side of social media, I do think that was the correct decision. Again, it's like suing the car manufacturer because somebody ran you over with a car. You see the lack of logic here? Honestly, I wish that the judgment from the Supreme Court had been a little bit stronger and had been a little bit clearer of what PLACA actually bars and made it difficult for the lower courts to bring a suit like this forward up to the Supreme Court again. I'm unfortunately sure that we will probably see another lawsuit like this end up being adjudicated simply because the lower courts don't want to enforce PLACA or this particular Supreme Court ruling. But only time will tell. However, in the meantime, there are a number of other things that we can talk about as far as legal news and the Second Amendment. The Trump administration is being sued by a number of states over FRTs, and unfortunately, this includes my home state of Nevada as well. I unfortunately have a rogue DA that seems to think that force reset triggers are machine guns, because of course he knows absolutely nothing about how firearms work. Quoting from the Associated Press here, 16 states have sued the Trump administration over its plan to allow the sale of forced reset triggers that make semi-automatic rifles fire more rapidly and return devices already seized to their owners. The suit announced Monday argues that returning the triggers would violate federal law, pose a threat to residents and law enforcement, and worsen gun violence. It was filed in federal court in Maryland. There have been several legal battles over the devices, yada, 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 yada. So, if you are in the following states, your district attorney does not think that you have Second Amendment rights. They are Delaware, Maryland, and New Jersey. Other states involved are Colorado, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington, along with the District of Corruption. I knew this was going to come. Some goofy fuckery was going to happen with the forced reset trigger decision, and of course, it's the usual suspects. But what really chafes my hide in particular is that Nevada is on this list. Now, Nevada is kind of a weird state. A little bit libertarian, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. But we've generally been pretty friendly about firearms. However, with us slowly turning purple because of all of the California refugees who come over here and then vote the exact same way, not learning from experience, unfortunately, yeah, we're just, I guess, another one of those states. I'm probably going to have to move, aren't I? Well, I hope not. In the meantime, I fortunately do have an opportunity to get rid of this particular clown who is up for re-election once again in, I believe it is 2026. Let me check and see here. Yes, 2026. He will be back up for re-election. And hopefully he will not be wasting my tax money filing suit against YouTube over, let's see, harming Nevada's youth. Sure, that sounds like a great use of my taxpayer dollars. No anti-monopoly suits, no censorship suits. No, YouTube's harming the youth. Right. Um, Ford, I sincerely hope and I will be trying to make sure that you don't get reelected. Have fun. But of course, that wraps up our topics for this. Let's move on to the next bit, which is actually a little bit of good news. HR 38 is currently working its way through Congress. This is actually a constitutional concealed carry bill. So let's take a quick look at the language that's included in it and see what we have here. So, HR 38 for the 119th Congress. Basically, a act that may be cited as the Constitutional Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. Basically, this would force a national reciprocity, but if I'm reading this right, then if a state that is constitutional carry only with no licensing scheme at all, that's an important bit. If there's no licensing scheme, then the driver's license would be your concealed carry license. However, the bit that is important here of a state which permits the person to carry a concealed firearm or is entitled to carry a concealed firearm in the state which the persons reside may possess or carry a concealed handgun that has been shipped or transported in interstate foreign commerce in any state that yada yada yada. But basically, so long as they don't have a licensing scheme, your state's constitutional carry, this sounds like your driver's license would end up being your CCW permit. I think there's one, maybe two states off the top of my head that have constitutional carry but no licensing scheme. So this is an interesting bill. I'm not entirely sure what the actual odds are of it passing, but this does also have some teeth in it, which is nice. Quoting here, a person who is deprived of any right, privilege, or immunity secured by this section under color of any statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, or usage of any state or political subdivision thereof may bring an action in appropriate court against any other person, including a state or political subdivision thereof, who caused the person to be subject to the deprivation for damages or other approved relief. So basically, if a gun to a unfriendly state messed with you for carrying under this particular law and you're from out of state, you would have recourse and you would actually be able to get damages back. So this is something that I do hope passes. However, I think that most of the attention right now is on the big beautiful bill and the fact that suppressors and short-barreled rifles and shotguns are actually back on the menu. So the short act, fortunately, has been brought back into the big beautiful bill, and while it is still somewhat early for this particular change, there is still a number of things that need to happen before we're able to actually see it and see if these particular changes will get out of committee and actually onto the floor. This is a promising sign. I do want to take a moment to shout out Only Tactical Fans on YouTube. This is Miss CRS Firearms YouTube channel. She's been growing it. They are now up to 5.24 or K subscribers, and it's pretty cool to see them grow. Definitely deserve it. But I did see her covering that, so this particular bit with silencers potentially coming off the NFA, as well as short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns. So I wanted to use this as an opportunity to give this a little bit of a shout out. But that does wrap things up for this particular section. We do have one more legal thing to cover that we can talk about, and we'll do that next. So we do actually have a little bit of a win from the Ninth Circuit Court. However, I do think that this is probably going to be somewhat of a temporary win. Let's celebrate what we can. A channel that I've actually recently found, Stambulith Law, I think is how you pronounce it, has coverage on this, and I thought this was rather interesting. But apparently, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals actually struck down California's one gun a month law and said, no, you can't restrict somebody to just one firearm per month to be purchased. That's ridiculous. Sanity from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? This is mind-boggling. But knowing California, they are probably going to end up turning right back around and fighting this in court all over again. Well, unfortunately, this will probably end up getting overturned. Then it's probably going to have to end up going back up to SCOTUS, and hopefully SCOTUS will be like, no, this is stupid. I sincerely hope so. I mean, they have been somewhat firearm friendly in the past, but it has been rather annoying that they have not taken up any new firearms laws, specifically some of the cases over magazine capacity sizes previously. But we'll see how this shakes out. At least for the moment, we can say, hey, we got a win out of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, even if it's temporary. I know. It's probably not going to end up being something that sticks, but hey, I guess we can celebrate the little wins. But Stambulith Law, they do seem to be kind of a cool YouTube channel, so I did want to point them out. He has been talking about a number of firearms-related lawsuits, legal movements, and it is nice to have another legal voice who's familiar with firearms out there that I can point somebody to and say, hey, they seem to be doing pretty good work. Go check them out if you haven't. Let me know what you guys think. And as far as legal topics for today's episode, that wraps everything up. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are about all of the different cases that we've covered, the different laws, as well as the states that are suing to stop the FRTs from being returned to their rightful owners and the FRT settlement from going through properly. Are you guys in, unfortunately, one of those states like I am that seems to think that the Second Amendment is a second-class right? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. But let's move on to our next topic.